What is an apologist? What's apologetics?
Yeah, it doesn't mean going around and apologizing to people.
Right.
You know,
because a lot of times when people hear that, that's the first thing they think. They're like,
Oh,
really?
he's Canadian.
You know, it's like, what?
Saying sorry.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to The Sweet Spot. Thank you so much for tuning in today to The Sweet Spot. And we are excited once again to be here on this beautiful summer day.
Too excited, yes.
We have a young man in The Sweet Spot today. I'm telling you, you are going to get your socks knocked off, okay? Because he is special. He is a special young man, and he is an internet speaker for the Ravi Zacharias Ministry. And I'm telling you, we are going to dig deep today because we're going to have a good time.
Good time.
First of all, I want to start by saying, bienvenue. Hola, ¿cómo estás, Logan?
Muy bien, gracias. ¿Cómo estás?
Bien, thank you.
Shall we keep going?
No, that's my limit right there, Logan. That is my limit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Logan Gates to The Sweet Spot. Yeah. I did that because I know you have a little Spanish background, you speak a little French. Yeah. You know, I just wanted to test you out a little bit.
Yeah, see if it's true. All right, I'm ready for the test. Give it a try.
Excellent. So Logan spent some time, I believe, down, where were you?
I was in Nicaragua.
In Nicaragua. Very good. Excellent.
Nice.
Excellent. We've built a couple of schools in Nicaragua.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
We haven't gone yet.
Yes. Okay.
We've
the
gone to some
foundation.
schools, yes, through our foundation, yes.
So we made it sound a little bit
So we're going to
more
have to
like
freshen up on our Spanish before we go down to check on the schools. Maybe you can give us some pointers today.
Some tutoring, we'll do some homework, and we'll get you ready.
All right, excellent.
Absolutely.
Good.
So thank you so much once again for joining us here. We've been trying to get this interview for months now with you, and I must say that we are excited. We're very excited to have this opportunity. Such a young man and so gifted and so just talented, and your love for God. So we're very excited to have you here in The Sweet Spot.
And with Ravi Zacharias Ministries. Now, when was the first time you actually heard of Ravi Zacharias?
I'm not even sure. Okay. It might have been in high school in the car.
Yes.
My parents put on the radio, and I think I heard his name then.
Right,
Wow.
yes. And so did you ever think, was he... when did it come in our radar screen, I should say, from a point of interest, and I might want to, this would be like something really cool to do, to be involved with?
Yeah, I'd say pretty late. Maybe maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
Because I didn't know people did what Ravi does for a job, going out to universities and speaking to people who are skeptical about faith and God and doing that as a job. I didn't know you could do that. And so it really was actually when I went to seminary that I learned about him for the first time, got to meet him a couple times and see the work that he was doing, and that's led to what I'm doing now.
Okay,
That's
excellent.
beautiful.
So we don't want to move along too fast.
Okay.
So we're going to back
That's
up.
right.
We want to know, how'd you get here today?
I drove. I live in Toronto, so
That was the question that was the answer that I hope you said,
That's
right?
right, yeah.
So now, what we're really getting the depth on is maybe how you grew up. Where'd you grow up, and a little bit of your upbringing, but I was hoping you gave me that answer first.
Yes, I do live in Toronto now.
Yes.
But I grew up in the States. I grew up in Virginia, and actually, we were realizing that my sister went to William & Mary, where you went.
That's
I went
right.
to the other university in Virginia, University of Virginia.
Yes.
So that was home for me. I grew up there.
Yes. Now, which one of the
funny
two
is
schools?
that? The three of us all grew up in the States.
Yeah.
Yes.
They let us into
awesome.
Canada.
I know, right?
Yes.
Great to be here. I love this place.
Yes. Oh, yes. So grew up in Virginia, and parents were they
Siblings?
from Virginia? Is that it kind of?
Yeah, my father's from Maryland.
Okay.
And my mother's actually from Delaware. So all in that East Coast Atlantic area.
Yes.
And I have two sisters. The one who went to William & Mary, she's older. She lives in Richmond now, which is another city in Virginia.
Yes.
And then I have a younger sister at James Madison University.
JMU.
Wow.
Yes.
Another city in Virginia.
Yes.
We're just having a real Virginia moment.
That's
Yes. Oh, bring it in tight. Bring it in tight. Yeah. Yes. Sir. You know why we have to bring it in tight? Because they say Virginia is for lovers, right?
That's what they say.
Yes. So that's wonderful. So now you went through university, and what did you major in?
I studied political and social thought.
Oh,
Political and social thoughts.
Yes.
Now,
Okay.
what is political and social thoughts?
Good question.
Yes.
It's looking at things like philosophy and politics, but at how it applies to really what our society looks like. So asking questions like, what should be the goal of our society? What does a good society look like? What does it mean to be a citizen? And even things like, ethics, human rights. Should that be something we care about, and why? So it was a very, it was a degree that wasn't as much practical skills, but it was really helpful, I think, for the kind of work that I'm getting to do now, talking about these bigger questions about things like purpose and meaning and destiny and what are we here for, those sorts of questions.
And I think with everything that's going on today, it would be very relevant.
So if you using that background, if you could change one thing in politics today, what would that be?
Ooh, change something in politics. I think in politics you're always going to have the side of the issues and the policy and the practical. What are we gonna do next? But I think that on the other side you have the issues surrounding, people and really what is the nature of human beings. And I think for politicians, I think that should come with humility to realize. I think that people, we're messed up. We elect our officials, and yet we need to acknowledge we're broken people. I think politicians should be open that they're broken people. But at the same time, I think that politics can give some more thought to, really what kind of society are we building? What should be the guidelines and the basis for that? And I think that gets us into bigger questions about, well, what's the purpose of life and existence? Why are we here? So I think I'd say, I like the reflection on the bigger questions involved in politics. I think sometimes it can be helpful to take a step back and think about where are we going? What are we building here?
Excellent.
And I know, speaking of politics, I know you grew up in Virginia and your family's in Virginia, and you went to University of Virginia.
That's right.
With the things that are happening right now in Charlottesville, can you just give us a little take on your thoughts?
I just think it's heartbreaking, and it's heartbreaking. I have friends there. I have professors who were at that rally. I have friends who are students who are there as well, and I just think it's a wake-up call in some ways. I think the attention it's getting is the attention it should get. We have issues in the States along these lines, and I think it's sadly showing the extent to which there remains a lot of bigotry and entrenched views and I'd say narrow-mindedness that really it's spilled over into outright violence. And I just think it's distressing, and I think it's been hard. I just was speaking this morning with a friend of mine in Charlottesville saying, she's working with students there and she's a Christian and she works with a lot of students who don't come from a Christian background but are just trying to wrap their heads around what is happening here. What is wrong with, how could something like this happen? So I think it's hard to know what to say except that there's something really wrong here that needs to be pressed into. And I hope that some of that can happen in the conversations that this starts.
Right. Very good. Very good.
When the conversation can really get heavy fast, and when we look at how things are, and sometimes it's good just to go back. What I want to know before we get too deep today is, what were your favorite things to do back in Virginia as a kid?
Yeah, I was more of a baseball guy than a football guy.
Nothing wrong with that. I played a little bit of baseball too. Yeah, you have to play all of that stuff, right?
That's right. That's right.
Good.
I grew up playing baseball, and then I ran track and field in high school, but also, had some family on the eastern shore of Maryland, which was right on the water, Chesapeake Bay there. So I grew up sailing and fishing and
That's right, you were a
canoeing.
surfer as well.
Yes, yeah.
That's right.
I do enjoy that.
Yes.
Awesome.
Not much of that in Toronto, unfortunately.
No.
I miss it.
Oh, good. We have to get you water skiing up on the lakes then.
I've done that a couple times. I like that a lot. I like that. Yes.
Is it a substitute at some level for? No.
I think if you could do water skiing and like big waves,
Yes.
that would make it a little more fun. I mean, it is fun. And
Right.
I guess I'm just not that good. I think that's
That's modesty, of course. Yeah, so good. As we build here, you're an apologist, right? And so you go around and you contend for the faith, right? And can you kind of bridge this gap now? So you come from Virginia, had a great childhood, sounds like, and doing the sports and water and all that kind of thing, and then you go to UVA, a great school, and within Virginia, it's probably at least as well respected as William and Mary, maybe even more so. And
went on to Oxford, got a master's.
Master's at Oxford. Now, to get in Oxford, you got to have a lot of gray matter.
I don't know. Sometimes, when you get there and everyone's got a nice English accent and they sound so smart, you come out with these American broad words.
Right.
You don't feel very smart. When you open your mouth, everyone looks at you.
Yes.
I felt that way a little bit.
Yes. Now, did you have a goal to go to Oxford, or did it come up somehow? Did the opportunity find you?
I found the program in Oxford because I loved what I was studying in a secular university. This is UVA. It's not a Christian or religious university, and yet we were talking about things like human rights that I found my faith had a lot to say about.
Right.
And I liked that idea of thinking Christianly, but not just off to one side, but actually engaging with my classmates who saw things differently, but I think had an interest in these bigger questions. So I wanted to go somewhere where I could examine those questions more deeply, but actually that would allow me to get back into academics and to be there as a Christian. Right. And so I found this program in Oxford that actually had a lot of thoughtful Christians in it, but not only Christians, but that would be something that could prepare me to go back to a secular university environment, which is often a lot of what I get to do now, and I really enjoy that.
Right. Now you say not all Christians. So did that classroom ever get a little bit antagonistic?
It did, yes. It was sort of, England is like Canada, really. It's got a real Christian history to it. Right. But sometimes that can give the sense that to be a Christian and really take it seriously is to be a little old-fashioned. Haven't we moved beyond that? You're taking this a little too seriously. And so, that was often something that came up. People asking, why do you believe that? Why haven't you moved on? Don't you see we've gone past that now? And so that really got me thinking about, how do I answer those questions? And what does the Christian faith have to say about that?
Now, for our listeners, can you maybe just explain to them what is an apologist? What's apologetics?
Yeah, it doesn't mean going around and apologizing to people.
Right. Because a lot of times when people hear that, that's the first thing they think. They're like,
"Oh, he's
really?
Canadian."
It's like, what?
Saying sorry.
Yes.
So that word, like you said, Michael, it means to contend or to defend the faith. That word actually comes from the Bible. It's used a couple times. It's this Greek word, apologia. And it's just this word that means to give a defense. And the verse that's often used to talk about what that means is 1 Peter 3:15.
Right.
And that verse says, always set apart Christ in your heart as Lord, always being prepared to make a defense when people ask you for the reason for the hope that you have. So that's why I talk about what I do a lot in terms of questions.
Right.
Jesus was someone who welcomed questions. He wasn't someone who said, just believe, just accept who I am. He welcomed people who were skeptical and were thinking through things. And so I think what it means to be an apologist, I think in some way we all are. Peter is saying that verse to everyone.
Right.
We all need to be ready to make an answer, to give a defense when people ask us questions about our faith. Why do we believe? Why are you a Christian? So that's, I'd say, what it means to be an apologist is to be focusing on how do we answer the questions of our culture and our friends and our family in a winsome way that points to really the hope that we have as Christians.
Beautiful.
Well, let's get started. Is God real?
All right, we're jumping in, eh?
We're jumping
Is God
in.
real? Yes.
Let's go.
Is God real?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
And I think he's a person who's not just real in an intellectual sense, but I think he's real in the sense that you can know him as a person.
Because a lot of times it's like God, Jesus, man or myth, right? People, they can't distinguish between the two.
That's right, yeah. And then when you bring Jesus in the conversation, people say, "Whoa, that's one way of looking at God." And did Jesus ever live? And I think it's all those sorts of questions that I often am trying to speak to people about or hearing their thoughts on. Yeah.
Does science support creation or evolution? Or both?
Yeah. That's a good question. All right, we're going deep. All right, I'm just going to hop right in. It's interesting. When you think about the history of science, we tend to think, science has been around forever. But actually, if you look at who the real first big modern scientists were, people like Newton and Galileo and Pascal, all these names you learn about in high school chemistry, you realize actually all of these really came to their work around the same time. Sort of was late Middle Ages into 15th, 16th century. And what's so interesting is most of them were Christians. And actually you have historians of science. Take someone like John Lennox, who was one of my professors in Oxford. And he's a pretty sharp guy. He's a mathematician. But he points out really clearly that actually in those cases, for them, science wasn't the enemy of their faith. Actually, their faith led them to the science they were doing. Wow. And the reason was this. Their faith led them to believe that there was a God with a rational mind who created a rational world. Science is all about looking at the world and trying to find patterns and order. But when you look at the history of human beings, we haven't always done that. It's actually just been more recently when you had these Christians thinking through their faith, realizing we should expect to find pattern and order, that they started doing science. So often I always want to, like you're saying about taking steps back, I want to take a step back and say, actually, it's Christian faith that has grown the movement of science. It shows us why we can do it. The universe isn't unpredictable. We can find patterns because we believe in a God of order. Right. And so when we think about questions, though, of creation, I think that's where, I'll just say just a quick word on that, that in the last 100 years, we now believe the universe had a beginning. Now, when I say we, I mean general, secular, most average people on the street. And what's interesting about that is ever since Aristotle, people believe the universe had always existed. No beginning point, we've always been here. Of course, this was always different from the Christian faith, which was saying, no, there was a moment when something came from nothing. But it was about, 100 years ago, some scientists started doing experiments looking at how the universe seemed to be expanding. It seemed like there actually was a moment where there was a beginning. It's expanding from one single point. And at the beginning, there was a lot of resistance to this theory, which we now call the Big Bang Theory. There is resistance to it. People saying, that sounds too Christian. That there was a moment where everything came from that one point. But now you might know this is the modern accepted theory in cosmology today. You go to U of T, you go to these top secular universities, and they'll say, that's what we believe. The question is then, wow, where do we get something from literally nothing? I don't just mean one point. I mean literally nothing. And I find actually that's a hard question to answer unless you believe in some kind of mind or force behind that thing. And I think that's actually a piece of evidence I see from creation for the existence of God.
Wow.
Very, very difficult, I think, too, for people to kind of get their head around, like, how did nothing create something, right?
Yeah.
And our answer would be very simply that it wasn't nothing that created something. God created that, right?
Exactly. Yes. I mean, as Christians, we say, from the universe's perspective, the universe was nothing, but you can't, if you have literally nothing, nothing can come from nothing, which means there had to be something behind the nothing.
Yes.
Some, what Plato called this prime mover, something that must have been there before, which brought it into existence. And the Bible obviously speaks about this not just as some random event, but something that God did very intentionally, that he had a purpose. And actually at the heart of that purpose was to create people who would bring him glory, people who he could know and walk with. And that's actually something that makes all these astronomy and far-off stars and planets, it all suddenly becomes very personal and real. When we look at the cosmos and we realize God has made this for his glory, but we're part of that. And God wants us to know him, to experience that glory that he's sharing with us by making us.
You talked about the very interesting point that the scientists were actually Christians, and wasn't Darwin a Christian as well?
Yeah, Darwin had an interesting spiritual journey.
Yes.
And, I think he certainly had beliefs in God, and I think towards the end of his life, he started grappling with how what he was, making his life work about fit with those beliefs he had a lot of his life. But I'll just say this. I was reading something the other day about what he began to write about music. Darwin, growing up, loved music and symphonies. And he said, as I started to realize that, in his opinion, God just we didn't need to believe in him anymore. We had science explaining everything. And I started to realize that God's probably not there. That, he said, actually, it affected the way I looked at music, which was the love of my life before. He said, before, it was something that I would listen to and I'd be brought to this place of almost transcendence. It's something so beautiful. And I just see it beyond that. Maybe the mind of God that is reflected in the creativity of a human being putting sounds together. And there's just something that, you know the feeling, right? When you have your favorite music on, and it just, you think that there's something really beautiful about this. But he said, once I started to leave my belief in God behind and really see that actually there's all just atoms and molecules, and the only reason I like this music is just because I've been evolved to like it, he said, music lost its enchantment for me. What I think is interesting about that is I think most people would say that they love movies or literature. They're things that move us deeply in the world. And we think sometimes that there must be more than just, what makes you, you, and me is just we're a bag of molecules, and just like as if we were trees or baby carrots or bugs, like all the same stuff. But actually we think, no, there's got to be something more meaningful than that. And I think it's interesting in Darwin's own journey to see that I think he really missed God. I think he missed what believing in God brought to the way he saw the rest of the world.
Wow.
He lost his belief that beauty was something real. It wasn't just an illusion. It wasn't just neurons firing. No, there's something real to it. So I think Darwin's very interesting. I think I see in him not just a scientist, but a guy just like you and me, who's grappling with the questions of what's this all about and what is beauty, and he had passions and loves just like we do. A very, very interesting guy, I think.
We're speaking kind of along lines of meaning and purpose, right? What would you say is our purpose here on earth?
I would say the Bible's really clear that God is someone who exists in this relationship of three people, Father, Son, and Spirit. And this is a little hard for us to wrap our heads around, but it's important because I think we see that God in himself, he doesn't need anything. But what exists between God himself is love. Christians say God is love, not just because God is loving, actually that in God himself is that love. And that gets us thinking about God's creation of us. When you're thinking about what is our meaning then and our purpose, it can't be like to complete something God was missing. God said, I want people to worship me. Actually, it has to be because God wanted to take that circle of love that existed forever within himself and break it open and bring human beings, people made in his image, into that relationship lovingly with this triune God. And what that says to me about the purpose of life then for humans is to know God. To know him, not just to know about him, but to know him, to walk with him, to live for him. And it's not just something I think that's a list of rules, but actually if it is about this relationship, if that's at the core of reality for the Christian, that at the heart of reality is a God who is relationship in himself, then I think our purpose is to experience that relationship ourselves, walking with him. And that's something we believe as Christians that can happen through what's happened on the cross.
So can someone live a purpose-filled life? Can they have real meaning in life in the absence of God?
I think that's a really great question. I have lots of friends who aren't Christians, and they ask me that very same question. Are you saying I can't have as meaningful a life as you can? And I think to some extent, of course, someone can say, I love, I love ladybugs. That's my research focus, and I'm going to dedicate my whole life to finding my meaning in my research. And of course, I'm going to say, yeah, in that sense, your life has meaning. You found meaning in that. But that's one sense of the word meaning.
Right.
Because I think there's a deeper sense, which is more the way we talk about meaning normally. Say that pen there. If I said, what's the meaning of that pen?
Right.
And let's say you started using it to hammer nails in the wall, and you said, this is a terrible pen. And I'd say, well, that's not what that pen is meant for. And you say, what do you mean? I said, well, that pen is meant for writing. It's designed to be written. And that's actually the kind of meaning I think normally we're talking about here is what something is really for. But when you start asking that question, what are you and me made for? That's something that the pen doesn't create its meaning for itself. Its meaning needs to be given.
Right.
The person who designed the pen made it to be written. And the question then is, who made you? What are you made for? What's the purpose of your life?
Wow.
And I think on that line of what meaning means, no, I don't think you can possibly have meaning without engaging that question of really, what's the purpose that you've been made for?
Right. That was an awesome answer.
So this is great.
Well
We're
said.
really just getting started, but this is the end of this segment. So now that we're warmed up and we're ready to go, we're going to stay on and do the next segment. But right here, we're going to place a little comma here, if you don't mind, maybe even a little semicolon, but before we depart, I'd just like to have you give the audience one of your favorite verses before we depart.
One of my favorite verses is when we ask the question, what was Jesus all about? I think he gives us one of the clear statements in Mark 10, verse 45. And he says, for the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. I think what that means is we'll never be able to understand Jesus. We'll never be able to wrap our minds around him unless we take seriously, not just that he came to serve, but the form that service took, which is that he came to give his life for us. And we can't get who Jesus was historically or culturally without grappling with what that means. What does it mean that Jesus gave his life for us? So that's my favorite verse, I'd say.
That's beautiful, and what a beautiful way to end.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here in the Sweet Spot, Logan.
You're welcome.
Like we're pumped, and I'm learning so much today. Like I really am. Listeners, please. Go online. He has some amazing videos online where he's speaking on all of these topics. It's so interesting. So when you have a moment, you're sitting down in a quiet spot, go online, Google Logan Gates, and you can hear more of Logan Gates. But we want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us here in the Sweet Spot. Logan, thank you once again for being in the Sweet Spot
Thanks
with
for
us
having me.
today.
Okay, now would you give them the website just straight on? What the
Yeah,
website?
sure. You can go to www.rzim.ca, and there's a lot of material there from, I have some things there, but a lot of members of the team as well, so you can find them.
RZIM, that's Ravi Zacharias.
International Ministries.
Right?
That's
Excellent.
Beautiful. Once again, Logan
Thanks.
Gates.
Thank you.
Logan Pearly Gates. He's up in his get there. All right.